Welcome to our second Getting Started video for akeytsu. In this tutorial, we'll go over the tools at your disposal in the rigging window. After watching this, you should easily be able to locate what you need to work with. For more advanced tutorials, I strongly recommend you access the technical documentation linked in the video description or browse through our tutorials on our YouTube channel. To follow along, make sure you are in rigging mode by checking the icon at the bottom right-hand corner. Press the Tab key to switch over to it quickly. You'll find all the characters loaded in your scene in the character bank window over to your left. Each character has a build pose denoted by a gray bone. In this case, I've created a new character which has an unbound attribute to it. It is renamed to bind pose when the skin is bound to the skeleton. After that, the icon turns red. Below that, paint and check lets you play around and test the limits of your rig. Here you can use the transform manipulator to get a better understanding of how the weights you are painting will deform your rig. By default, bind pose is also used as your reference pose when you start animating. From paint and check, a custom ref pose can be created and assigned to the character by simply manipulating the joints in the bind pose mode and then clicking on this button here. The transformation panel can be accessed on the right hand side. You'll be able to change any transformation value set for your joints or mesh when it is unbound. When importing a rig mesh, it can be useful to get rid of unneeded pre-rotations and freeze everything as well. Freezing your mesh is a great way to center your object and zero out all your rotations and translations. In this case, this mesh has a value of 0.244 on the Z. By clicking the freeze button, you'll notice that my center point has reset to 0 and all of my transforms have reset to 0 as well. But the overall position of the mesh is preserved. In this case, it's useful to turn on the grid and sometimes move the character in a logical center position. Clicking the freeze button, again, you'll see the manipulator hops to the 0 point in space. It can also be used when defining precise values for a given channel. In this case, in build pose mode, I will add a few more objects and bones to my character. It also can be used when defining very precise values for a given channel. In this case, I simply want to add a spine and center it on the joint. I'll show my bones. I'll then highlight one bone. In my bind pose, I will add a few joints. By selecting all of these joints, I can then come into the transform panel and ensure that on the x-axis they are all zeroed and in a straight line. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to quickly run through the new auto rigging feature in akeytsu. First, in build pose, select your mesh and come over to the Rig Atelier window where you'll see the new Auto Rig button. Click it, select your skeleton type, how many spines you want, and then start placing your widgets. The best way to do this is from the front view. You'll notice that every time you drag a widget, it can snap to a logical location. You don't have to be exact, as some refinement later on down the road will be needed. Once I have all my hot points set up, simply press this button to generate half the rig. Once half the rig is done, you only need to refine and adjust some of the bone positions before you're ready to generate the other half of the rig and make an initial bind pass. Even though from the front view some of these joints look correct, additional adjustments may be needed. You don't have to be exact. In this case, I've noticed that the neck and heads are a little too far apart. so I'm just going to quickly adjust them to put them in place. Once that is done, I can generate the other half of my rig, and additionally, I can do a quick bind pass through the auto rigging feature. You'll notice that some of the joint orientations may need to be corrected, as in the case with the wrist here. From here, however, I can go back into my bind pose and add more joints as needed. Inserting a joint in the middle of two joints is as easy as clicking on a joint and clicking on this button right here. Once activated, simply move to a joint, click. You'll notice akeytsu inserts a new joint and interactively lets you determine its placement. Once you release it, pressing enter, you'll have a new intermediary joint that you can rename and reposition to your need. This joint won't have any binding information to the mesh initially, so to continue binding and paint mesh to this joint influence, simply go into Paint and Check, and then choose either Add Paints or numerically add paints, and continue your work. If I wish to separate one joint from another, that's easy too. In this case, maybe I want to unparent this joint from the shoulder. Going back into my bind pose, I can simply highlight a joint and then choose to unparent from that selection. With it unparented, I can move it, and I can also add additional joints to the parent joint it used to be connected to. I can then connect these two joints by selecting the first and the second and holding down Control. Pressing the parent button will join those two together, and in the hierarchy, you'll notice that we've created a new joint 2 that has the original shoulder parented to it. Back in our original setup, you remember that I said that some of these joints needed to be oriented properly. By showing our axes, going to our preference menu here, going into our decorators as well, and under pivot size factor, I'm going to up this to 1, and under pivot size factor for unselected joints, I'll set that to 1 as well. This will give me an easier way to identify how the axes are oriented. In this case, the wrist is not in correct alignment. To adjust this, I will first need to remove the IK component, click on my wrist, and then try to automatically aim it to the joints. Sometimes this doesn't work and the follow axis goes to the wrong location. Easy enough, you can simply move it into the right location by using the manipulator. Once that is in proper alignment, creating a new IK chain is as easy as clicking on the first joint, the last joint, and adding an IK component in the rig window. As with everything akeytsu, you'll notice that once my IK joint is assigned, I can now manipulate in any IK or FK mode. Within akeytsu, you'll find your full hierarchy for characters located in the tree panel here. You'll notice that hovering over the tree panel extends it by a predetermined amount. This is configurable by again going to the cog on the tree panel and changing the hover setting to whatever you desire. Using the frozen state will keep the tree panel maintained at that window size. In the tree window, we have some different icons here to note. With a completed character, you'll notice that the top node with a C and a circle inside is your character. This is the top node hierarchy for the character. Think of it as a group in other programs. Down below, if you see a mesh icon, this is the component that you've imported from another package and that you will bind all of your skeletons. Beneath that, you may see IK handles for these are base IK controls, typically for hands or for feet without reverse foot control. If you see a foot icon, this denotes a specialized IK controller known as a reverse foot IK controller. With the reverse foot IK controller, you get a lot of functionality built in. Not only can you rotate, translate, but you can also do specialized things like lifting heels and toes. Additionally, you can swing your foot and roll. All of these are available on the fly just by using the positions of the joints. Back in the tree window, you'll notice that we have our first joint. This is denoted by a bone icon, which is green. Clicking the plus sign beneath this, you'll start to expand the view to see all of the children in a skeleton hierarchy. For the most part, this should be left untouched unless you know what you're doing. A few options can be set in the property window for each item. Here, for example, I would like to uncheck Compensate Scale for all my joints I was building if a rig was going to Unity, since Unity does not support it. To select every joint, simply right-click and say Select Hierarchy. This will select all joints in the hierarchy view, but leave anything outside, such as the IK controllers and the mesh, untouched. In the Properties window, simply unchecking Compensate Scale will now set this property for every single bone. Additionally, to get more fine-tuned control over your rig, you can choose to hide and unhide certain joints. In this case, I would like to hide some of the joints that I know I can grab easily, but other joints that I will need to assist me when I animate. From here, I can simply choose to not show the chest and maybe not show the elbow. I can also do this very quickly by right-clicking on a bone, selecting all its children, and tapping H. Now, when I don't show my connections, I have a cleaner rig with areas defined that I know will be easily manipulated, but specialized areas that may require more precise picking. Now let's go over how to skin your character in the Skin Atelier. Here you'll find all the tools to bind the skin and edit your skinning data. This will only be possible when you are in paint and check mode. In this case, the auto rig has already bound the mesh to the skeleton. Let's unbind this and rebind it manually. We're going to select the mesh in the tree window, come over to the Skin Atelier window, and check Unbind from Skin. As you'll notice, the mesh icon has changed to a blue square box. This denotes that this mesh is now selectable and therefore not bound to any skeleton. For now, we're going to roughly rebind the skeleton back. In this case, I'm going to select the entire hierarchy for the root, toggle visibility, click 4 on my keypad to show all the joints. This will give me a good idea of what I'm expecting to do. I'm going to select the root of the character, right-click again, select the entire hierarchy, and then scroll up to uncheck the root joint. I don't want the rig to be confused when binding to the mesh. This root joint is merely a game joint for positional purposes, but all other joints are needed for binding information. Once this is done, I will Control Select my mesh. I will come to the Skin Atelier window, and I will press Bind. Though akeytsu's geodesic voxel binding does a pretty good job at base level binding, you'll notice going through your character, there are some issues. These can be solved in two different ways, by either painting the verts out or by manually selecting the vertex and unassigning them from the weights that the influence has over them. To facilitate this, I'll switch to my mesh view with overlaid wireframe. In here, I will simply hold down Shift and drag my cursor over to select a group of meshes. Once this group is selected, I'm going to remove the influence from this joint here and auto-assign it to the other influences. Simply using the spinner, I can drag this down and you'll see the mesh now pops into place. This gives me a good base level bind to continue going. There's a lot more you can do to refine your skin in akeytsu, but we're not going to go into depth right now. The painting window is where a lot of the finessing will be done to your rig, and that's handled later on in more detailed tutorials. For more information, you can find a full tutorial series on the skinning workflows on our YouTube channel. An important part of akeytsu is its transform hub called the spinner. Designed as a centerpiece for akeytsu, the circular widget should be placed close to your model to let you focus on animation or skin weighting without unnecessary distractions and preventing tedious camera moves and missed selections. Depending on your selection, the spinner will display the classic move, rotate, scale, IK pole vector, or reverse foot specific blend or blend shape controls. We'll detail the classic move, rotate, and scale behaviors. While pressing either I or the move icon in the spinner, you'll notice that your icon will switch to a move widget. In this view, you can drag to move the forward base control or joint. The spinner acts as a transform channel for each different axis. By dragging on each different axis, you can constrain movement by using the local world space switch. You can constrain your movements to world space or local space facing direction of the object or joint. There's also a discrete transform mode. Discrete transform mode means the mode will snap in increments specified in the setting. If you click the settings panel, you'll notice that we have a discrete move step value of 0.001 meters and a discrete rotate step value of 15 degrees. Going to the move panel, we have additional functionality including our axis transforms, discrete rotate, local world space rotates. Additionally, we have more features for the rotate version. By middle click dragging, you'll notice that your object will now free rotate. This is sometimes called orbit rotate in other packages. In scale mode, you have the option for world space transform mode. Additionally, you can scale along the joint's axis, discrete scale, or uniform scale. Additional features in rotate and scale mode are by using the right-click mouse button to select alternate modes. In rotation mode, this alternate mode will isolate the object, and if I show my joints here and select this clavicle, you'll notice that with isolation turned off, the clavicle will move the arm as expected. However, with isolate turned on, you'll notice that only the rotation will be affected and the translation will not. This is also true in the scale mode. In scale mode, if we right click, we go into a tune scale mode. This will maintain volume. This will be detailed in the later section of this video. Quick shortcut keys for these modes are I for move, O for rotation, and P for scale. By placing your hands on the right side of the keyboard, you'll have direct access to these functions. In addition, when you're animating, you'll have easy ways to both play and scrub your timeline. More about that will be detailed, and advanced features of the spinner will be detailed in later videos in the animation mode tutorial. Now we will review the IK and reverse foot controls of your character. Animating in IK and FK workflows requires two separate skeletons, usually one for IK and one for FK, and a lot of controls for animators. It can indeed become quite tedious and complex. Typically, these are switched by the use of scripts or channel boxes. But in akeytsu, we have a different approach to rigging. IK is much simpler and easy to use and manipulate in akeytsu because our solvers are based on angles from your bind pose or reference pose. When the handle is activated, it dynamically resolves your joint chain depending where your leaf is moved. In this case, moving the IK joint moves it how you would expect. By using the spinner, we can adjust the position of the hand and rotation. Additionally, we can adjust the pull vector. But here's where the magic happens. By moving these nodes, you'll also notice that your IK becomes free and able to move. This allows you to make modifications on the fly, no matter what mode you are in. A reverse foot control follows the same philosophy and embarks twist, bank, and roll controls. By selecting a reverse foot, you'll notice you can move the foot freely. You can rotate it as you expect. Additionally, controls for ball rotation, heel pivot, twist, and bank are also available. Again, when you use these controls, you'll notice you are still free to use any forward K method or IK method you choose. To build a reverse foot control, simply click on the first joint in your chain and the last joint, which would be your toe, by control shifting. This will give you options in the Rig Atelier window to either create a standard IK control or the reverse foot IK control. Once you're there, it's as easy as positioning the markers to tell akeytsu exactly where your foot bank pivot is going to be. Moving these objects out in local mode encompasses the foot and automatically gives akeytsu that opportunity to build the control for you. IK controls are even simpler. Click on the first chain. IK controls are even easier. Click on the first chain and the last chain and click the IK button. You'll notice a handle automatically circles the last node, indicating you've created an IK chain. In this method, I'll build additional skeleton options. I'll build a long dynamic chain, and in this long dynamic chain, I will select the first and last control and create an IK. You'll notice that this chain not only has your standard shoulder, elbow, wrist locations, but also has 2 additional chains. When you move this chain around in paint and check mode, you'll notice that your IK chain bends accordingly. By placing IK chains at intermediary points, you can gain finer control over your IK chain. And furthermore, pinning takes us to a whole new level. Much like any other packages, you'll notice that akeytsu does a lot of legwork for bone deformation. It makes it easy and intuitive to animate your characters. But what about Blendshapes? Akeytsu also lets you animate with Blendshapes imported through other packages in the simplest and smartest way possible. Here, I'll just select one of the joints, the specialized controllers. I'll just select one of the specialized controllers, and by moving up or down, I can engage Blendshapes. By right-clicking, I have optional Blendshapes to choose from. Finally, by middle-clicking, I can have a whole other set of controls for my character. For more details on Blendshapes, please refer to the dedicated tutorial designed specifically for Blendshapes. After your rig is complete, you'll want to go over the picker panel, which is basically where you'll define a custom hierarchy that suits your workflow without it breaking the hierarchy. You're safe to mess around here, so you can quickly navigate through the joints with the D, arrow up and down buttons in order to get a more comfortable feeling rig that naturally flows with your key presses. If I select the arm here and I press the arrow down key, you'll notice that we cycle through the various joints. However, in this example, the arm twist is a specialized joint, and I don't really care to navigate to that as it is a specialized joint. Easily enough, I can simply go into my bind pose, drag and drop, and even in my paint and check mode, I can drag and drop. Now, when navigating with the down arrow key, you'll notice that my cursor skips over that joint and lands right where I need it to be, at the wrist. This makes posing my character a lot easier and more fluid. Now that we've seen everything about rigging, let's move forward and take a closer look at what akeytsu has to offer in terms of animation in the next video. Meanwhile, don't hesitate to click on the links in the description if you want to hit us up on our Discord service or write us on our forums.